The winter of 1887 tried to kill everything it touched. Caleb Vance had grown accustomed to that kind of cruelty. He sat in the corner of McGrath's saloon, nursing a whiskey that tasted like kerosene, and watching snow pile against windows that hadn't been cleaned since summer. The stove in the center of the room belched smoke that made his eyes water, but nobody complained. Cold was worse than smoke. Cold didn't just sting, it murdered. Around him, men gambled with money they didn't have, told lies nobody believed, and pretended the frontier was something other than a slow death sentence, punctuated by brief moments of not quite starving. Caleb wasn't like the others, though. He'd stopped pretending years ago. Another hand, Vance? The voice belonged to Cyrus Webb, a cattle rancher whose spread was slowly being reclaimed by wilderness. Cyrus had the kind of optimism that only came from stupidity or desperation. Probably both. "No money left to lose," Caleb said. His voice came out rougher than he intended, scraped raw by too much silence over too many winters. "Then why the hell are you here?" Cyrus laughed, but there was an edge to it. Men in Montana didn't gather in saloons just for company. They came to forget, to fight, or to feel something other than the gnawing emptiness that came with trying to carve civilization from rock and ice. Caleb didn't answer. The truth was complicated. The truth was that his cabin felt too quiet these days, that the silence had weight, that sometimes he could still hear, "Make room, boys." The voice cut through the smoke and noise like a knife through butter. Caleb looked up to see a man he didn't recognize pushing through the crowd. Tall, but stooped with the kind of exhaustion that went bone deep. His coat was torn at the shoulder, his boots were splitting at the seams, and his eyes had that hollow look Caleb had seen in men who'd reached the end of their rope and found nothing there to grab onto. "Got no money?" someone called out. "Didn't ask for money," the stranger said. He dragged something behind him, and the crowd parted to reveal what it was. Not what. Who? A woman stumbled forward, her wrists bound with rope. Her dress so filthy it was impossible to tell what color it had once been. Her dark hair hung in tangles around her face, and when she lifted her head, Caleb saw eyes that burned with something that might have been fury, or might have been terror, or might have been both. The saloon went quiet except for the crackle of the stove. "Name's Porter," the stranger said. "Jack Porter, and I'm a gambling man." "We can see that," Cyrus said slowly, "but we don't exactly. She's collateral." Porter yanked the rope, and the woman stumbled, but didn't fall. "Worth more than money, if you ask me. Good cook, strong, young enough to bear children." Someone laughed. It was a nervous sound, the kind men made when they weren't sure if they were witnessing a joke or a crime. Caleb's hands curled into fists beneath the table. "You can't be serious," said Martin Cross, the town blacksmith. "This is Montana, not a damn slave market." "Ain't slavery if she's already mine," Porter said. He pulled a piece of paper from his coat pocket, waved it around like a flag. "Got the papers right here. Legitimate. She signed herself over to me for debts owed, and now I'm putting her up as stakes. Any man brave enough to play?" The woman's eyes swept across the room, and for just a moment, they locked with Caleb's. Something passed between them. Something Caleb couldn't name. It wasn't pleading. It wasn't hope. It was something harder than that. Something that reminded him of the way a wolf looked when it was cornered, calculating whether to fight or run, knowing neither option was good, but refusing to simply give up. "This is insane," Cyrus muttered. "McGrath, you gonna let this happen in your establishment?" The saloon owner, a barrel-chested man with a beard that reached his sternum, shrugged. "Ain't exactly illegal. Man's got papers. Besides, stranger things have happened in this territory." "Yeah, but that don't make it right." "Right don't pay for whiskey," McGrath said flatly. Porter threw a handful of coins onto the nearest table. 5-card draw. High stakes. Winner takes her, along with whatever else is in the pot. "And if you lose?" Martin asked. "Then I walk out of here with nothing." Porter's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Same situation I'm already in." More laughter, this time louder, crueler. Men smelled blood in the water, and it made them reckless. Caleb knew he should leave, should walk out that door, head back to his frozen cabin, and forget he'd ever seen any of this. He'd spent 3 years learning to mind his business. 3 years teaching himself that caring was just another word for pain. But then the woman looked at him again. And Caleb thought about the graves behind his cabin, thought about the way the world had taken everything from him piece by piece until he was nothing but bones and breath. Thought about how he'd become the kind of man who sat in corners and watched life happen to other people because participating hurt too much. He stood up. I'll play. The room went silent again. Porter's eyes narrowed. You got money?
Some, Caleb lied. He had maybe $40 to his name, enough to buy supplies for another month if he was careful, enough to lose and still survive the winter, though it would be a near thing. Then sit down, friend. Porter pulled out a chair, and the smile that crossed his face was the smile of a predator who'd just spotted easy prey.
Caleb moved to the table. Around him, the other men shifted, some moving closer to watch, others backing away as if distance might protect them from whatever was about to happen. The woman was pushed into the corner near the stove. She didn't struggle, didn't speak, just watched with those burning eyes. You know how to play poker, Vance? Cyrus asked quietly. Well enough. Well enough to win against a man who's got nothing to lose. Caleb didn't answer. The truth was, he'd never been particularly good at cards. Sarah had always teased him about it, said he had the worst poker face in Montana, said every thought that crossed his mind showed up on his face like words on a page. Sarah. He pushed the thought away, same as he always did. McGrath dealt the cards with practiced efficiency. Around the table, 4 other men had joined, fools or opportunists, Caleb couldn't tell which. Maybe there wasn't a difference. The first hand went to a ranch hand named Douglas. He won $30 and a knife with a bone handle. The second hand went to Porter. He raked in the pot with hands that shook slightly, and Caleb realized the man wasn't just desperate. He was sick. Something in his lungs, probably. The frontier had a dozen ways to kill you, and disease was one of the most reliable. Your deal, Vance, McGrath said. Caleb's hands were steady as he shuffled. That surprised him. He'd expected them to shake, expected his body to betray the storm of thoughts in his head. You know what you're doing? Porter asked. There was something probing in his tone, like he was trying to get a read on Caleb. Playing cards, Caleb said simply. You know what you're playing for? Caleb's eyes flicked to the woman in the corner. I know. Then you're a damn fool. Porter's laugh turned into a cough that bent him double. When he straightened, there was blood on his lips. But I like fools. They make life interesting. The cards fell. Caleb looked at his hand and felt something in his chest tighten. Nothing. Absolutely nothing worth betting on. But across the table, he saw Porter's eyes gleaming with something that looked like triumph, and Caleb understood with sudden clarity that this man needed to win not because he wanted to keep the woman, but because he needed to believe he still had something of value to lose. Pride, maybe. Or just the illusion of control in a world that had stripped him of everything else. Your bet, Vance, McGrath prompted. Caleb looked at his cards again. Looked at Porter's barely concealed satisfaction. Looked at the woman who was watching him with an expression he still couldn't decipher. He thought about the cabin, about the land that wouldn't grow anything, about the graves and the silence and the slow process of disappearing into a life that felt less real with each passing day. And then he pushed all his money into the center of the table. All in, he said quietly. The room erupted. He's lost his mind, someone shouted. Vance, you don't have to… Let him play, Porter interrupted. His voice had gone cold. Man wants to throw his life away. That's his business. The other players folded quickly, wanting no part of whatever was happening between Caleb and this stranger. Within seconds, it was just the two of them, staring at each other across a table covered in coins and crumpled bills. Show your hand, Porter said. Caleb laid down his cards. Pair of threes. Nothing else. Laughter erupted again, but this time it had a mean edge to it. The kind of laughter that said these men were watching someone drown and finding entertainment in it. Porter reached for the pot. Wait, Caleb said. You haven't shown your hand. Don't need to. You've got nothing. Rules are rules, McGrath said, and there was something in his voice that suggested even he was curious now. Show the cards, Porter. For just a second, something flickered across Porter's face. Something that might have been fear. He laid down his cards. Pair of twos. The laughter died like someone had cut its throat. Caleb stared at the cards, not quite believing what he was seeing. Around him, men were silent, stunned. I'll be damned, Cyrus whispered. Porter's face had gone the color of old snow. His hands trembled as he stared at the cards, as if willing them to change, to become something other than what they were. That makes Vance the winner, McGrath said into the silence. No, Porter's voice cracked. No, that's not. We go again. Double or nothing. You got nothing left to double, McGrath pointed out. Game's over, Porter. Take your loss and walk. I can't! The words came out as a roar that made everyone jump. Porter was on his feet, his chair crashing backward. You don't understand. I need... Another coughing fit cut him off. This one was worse than the last. Blood spattered the table, the cards, the money. When it finally subsided, Porter was on his knees, gasping like a fish pulled from water. Get him out of here, McGrath said, and his voice had lost all its earlier amusement. Someone get Doc Williams. Two men hauled Porter to his feet and half carried, half dragged him toward the door. As he passed Caleb, he grabbed his shirt with one bloody hand. You made a mistake, he wheezed. Biggest mistake of your life. She's cursed. Everything she touches dies. You'll see. You'll all see. Then he was gone, swallowed by the night and the snow. Caleb stood slowly. His legs felt strange, like they belonged to someone else. The woman was still in the corner, still bound, still watching. Well, Cyrus said eventually, I guess she's yours now, Vance. That's not how Caleb started, but he didn't know how to finish the sentence. Papers say she's property, McGrath said, picking up the document Porter had left behind. And you won the bet fair and square. That makes her your property, legal as anything in this territory. I don't want property, Caleb said. His voice sounded distant to his own ears. Then what the hell did you bet everything for? Martin demanded. Caleb didn't have an answer. He walked over to the woman, acutely aware of every eye in the room following him. Up close, he could see details he'd missed before. The rope had rubbed her wrists raw. There was a bruise on her cheekbone, old and fading to yellow. Her dress was torn at the hem, and her shoes were held together with what looked like wire. But her eyes were clear and sharp and completely unafraid. I'm going to untie you, Caleb said quietly, and then you can leave. Go wherever you want. You understand? She didn't respond, just kept watching him with that same burning intensity. Caleb reached for the rope, and someone in the crowd muttered, Fool's gonna set her free. Threw away $40 for nothing. His fingers fumbled with the knots. They were tight, tied by someone who knew what they were doing. It took him nearly a minute to work them loose, and the whole time he was aware of her breathing, steady and controlled despite everything. The rope fell away. For a long moment she just stood there, rubbing her wrists. Then she spoke for the first time. You have a horse? Her voice was lower than he'd expected, rough around the edges, like it hadn't been used much lately. Yes, Caleb said. Food at your place? Some. The land Porter mentioned. The papers say 40 acres up near Copper Ridge. That yours too? Caleb nodded slowly. It's not much. Won't grow anything. I've tried. Nothing grows if you don't know how to listen, she said. Then, to the room at large, anyone else planning to claim ownership of me tonight? Silence. Good. She turned back to Caleb. Then I'm coming with you. Not because I belong to you. I don't belong to anyone. But because you just spent your last dollar on something everyone in this room calls worthless, which means you're either the stupidest man in Montana or the only one worth trusting. Probably the first one, Caleb admitted. Maybe. Something that might have been a smile ghosted across her face. But I'm betting on the second. She walked toward the door without looking back. Caleb followed, ignoring the laughter and the muttered comments and the feeling that he'd just stepped off a cliff into darkness. Outside, the cold hit like a physical blow. Snow was falling harder now, erasing tracks almost as soon as they were made. Name's Eliza, she said, pulling her thin dress tighter around her shoulders. Eliza Hart. Caleb Vance. I know. Heard them say it inside. She started walking in the direction of the stable, her bare feet leaving marks in the snow that made Caleb's chest ache. You going to tell me why you did it? Did what? Don't play stupid. You knew you had a bad hand. I could see it on your face, so why bet everything? Caleb didn't answer right away. They reached the stable and he saddled his horse, a gray mare named Ash who'd seen better years, while Eliza waited. Finally, as he helped her onto the horse, she didn't really need the help, he noticed, but she accepted it anyway. He said, 3 years ago, I had a wife. Her name was Sarah. She died giving birth to our daughter. Daughter died too, about an hour later. Never even got to name her. Eliza was quiet. After that, Caleb continued, I stopped seeing the point of most things. Stopped caring. Just went through the motions. He swung up behind her, and the horse started moving without being told, knowing the way home. But tonight, watching that bastard drag you in there like you were nothing, I don't know. Something broke, I guess. Or maybe something fixed itself. Hard to tell the difference sometimes. So you saved me because you couldn't save them, Eliza said. It wasn't a question. Maybe. Or maybe I'm just tired of watching bad things happen and pretending I'm not part of the problem. They rode in silence after that, through snow that was ankle-deep and rising. The town disappeared behind them, swallowed by white. Ahead, somewhere in the darkness, was Caleb's cabin, small, drafty, and perched on land that had defeated every attempt at cultivation. Tell me about the land, Eliza said eventually. Not much to tell. Bought it 4 years ago. Thought I could farm it. Tried everything, wheat, corn, potatoes. Nothing takes. Soil's either too rocky or too acidic or too cursed, depending on who you ask. But you kept trying. For a while. Then Sarah died, and I stopped seeing the point. You planning to start again? Caleb considered the question. Hadn't planned on it, no. Might want to reconsider, Eliza said, because if I'm staying, that land's going to start producing, one way or another. There was such certainty in her voice that Caleb almost believed her. The cabin appeared out of the snow like a ghost, a squat, rough-hewn structure with a chimney that leaked smoke and windows that rattled in the wind. It wasn't much, but it was shelter, and on the frontier that counted for something. Caleb helped Eliza down from the horse, then led Ash into the lean-to that served as a stable. When he came back inside, he found Eliza standing in the center of the single room, taking everything in with the same sharp-eyed intensity she'd shown in the saloon. "Where's the fire?" she asked. "Burned down before I left. Didn't seem worth rebuilding." Without a word, Eliza moved to the fireplace and began arranging kindling with practiced efficiency. Within minutes, she had a fire going that filled the cabin with light and warmth. "You know how to do that," Caleb observed. "My father was a botanist," Eliza said, still crouched by the fire. "Spent my childhood traveling with him across 3 territories, learning plants, soil, ecosystems. Fire's part of the ecosystem, too. Everything connects, if you know how to look. Where's your father now?" "Dead. 2 years back. Cholera." She said it without emotion, but Caleb heard the weight beneath the words. "Left me with nothing but knowledge, and knowledge doesn't buy food or shelter when you're a woman alone in Montana. So you signed yourself to Porter. Had a choice between that and starving. Seemed like the better option at the time." She finally looked at him. "I was wrong." Caleb pulled out the only chair in the cabin and sat down heavily. The adrenaline that had carried him through the last hour was fading, leaving exhaustion in its wake. "You can sleep in the bed. I'll take the floor." "We can both take the floor," Eliza said. "Bed's too small for anything else to make sense, and I'm not about to kick you out of your own bed on the first night." She found blankets in a chest by the wall and began arranging them on the floor near the fire. Her movements were methodical, economical, no wasted motion. "Eliza," Caleb said. She paused. "I meant what I said. You're free to go whenever you want. Come spring, if you want to head to Helena or Virginia City or anywhere else, I'll give you money for the journey." "Why would I do that?" "Because staying here doesn't make sense. There's nothing here. The land's dead, the cabin's falling apart, and I'm—" He stopped, unsure how to finish. "You're what? Broken?" Eliza's laugh was sharp. "Look around, Vance. We're all broken. Question isn't whether we're damaged, it's whether we're going to do something with the pieces." She lay down on the blankets and pulled another over herself. Within minutes, her breathing had evened out into sleep. Caleb sat by the fire for a long time, watching shadows dance across the walls. Outside, the wind howled. And somewhere in the darkness beyond his door, the land waited, 40 acres of stubborn earth that had refused every attempt to coax life from it. But maybe, Caleb thought as sleep finally pulled him under, maybe he'd just been asking the wrong questions. Maybe the land didn't need to be conquered. Maybe it needed to be understood. When Caleb woke, dawn was breaking gray and cold through the windows. Eliza was gone. For a moment, panic seized him. The thought that she'd left in the night, disappeared back into the frontier where women like her vanished without a trace. Then he heard movement outside. He pulled on his boots and coat and stepped into air that felt sharp enough to cut. Frost covered everything, turning the world into something crystalline and unreal. Eliza was kneeling in what passed for the garden plot, her bare hands digging into frozen soil. She'd found his tools, a shovel, a rake, things he hadn't touched in over a year, and arranged them nearby with the same efficiency she'd shown with the fire. "What are you doing?" Caleb asked. She didn't look up. "Learning. It's freezing. Your hands? We'll be fine. Sit down and be quiet. I'm listening." Caleb almost argued, then thought better of it. He sat on the porch step and watched as this woman who'd been property less than 12 hours ago knelt in his garden like a supplicant at an altar. Minutes passed. 10. 20. Finally, Eliza sat back on her heels. "It's not dead," she said. "What?" "The land. Everyone told you it was dead, didn't they? Too rocky, too acidic, cursed, all of that." "Yes," Caleb admitted. "They're wrong." She stood, brushing dirt from her dress. Her hands were red from the cold, but her eyes were bright with something that looked almost like excitement. "The land's not dead. It's just been misunderstood." "I don't follow." Eliza crossed to where he sat and crouched down so they were eye level. "Your soil has high iron content, probably from the rocks. You're sitting on an old mineral deposit. That's why traditional crops failed. They couldn't handle the acidity. So it is dead for farming." "No, it's perfect for the right kind of farming." She grabbed his hand, her skin was ice cold, and placed it on the earth. "Feel that? It's frozen. Beneath the frost. Feel deeper." Caleb closed his eyes and tried. At first there was nothing. Then, so faint he almost missed it, he felt something, a warmth, a kind of potential energy, like the earth itself was holding its breath. "It's alive," Eliza said softly. "It's just been waiting for someone to understand what it needs." She pulled her hand back and stood. "Here's what we're going to do. Come spring, we don't plant in rows. We plant in guilds, companion planting, things that work together, support each other. Nitrogen fixers with heavy feeders, deep roots with shallow, plants that attract beneficial insects next to plants that need pollination." "That's not how farming works." "It's not how farming works here," Eliza corrected, "but I've seen it work in other places, different places." She looked out across the 40 acres, and something in her expression made Caleb think she was seeing not what was, but what could be. "Your land doesn't want to be tamed, Vance. It wants to be partnered with." "And you can do that? Make it work?" "I can try." She looked at him directly. "But I need you to trust me, really trust me. Not just say it, but mean it. Because what I'm proposing is going to look insane to everyone else. They're going to laugh, call us fools. Maybe worse." Caleb thought about the graves behind the cabin, thought about 3 years of going through motions, of breathing but not really living. "I'm already the fool who gambled everything for a woman," he said. "Might as well be the fool who trusts her too." This time, Eliza's smile reached her eyes. "Then let's get to work." They spent the rest of the day preparing. Eliza sketched plans in the dirt, explaining concepts Caleb barely understood. Something about mycorrhizal networks and nitrogen cycles, and the way certain plants could actually improve soil rather than depleting it. "It's about cooperation," she said at one point, her breath misting in the cold air. "Nature doesn't work in isolation. Everything's connected. The plants, the soil, the insects, even the fungi underground. It's all one system. Most farmers try to simplify it, control it, but that just breaks the connections. So we complicate it instead. We restore it," Eliza corrected, "or try to. Your land remembers what it used to be before people came and tried to force it into something else. We're just helping it remember." It sounded like madness, but watching Eliza work, watching the way her hands moved with confidence over frozen earth, Caleb found himself believing, or maybe just wanting to believe. As the sun began to set, painting the snow in shades of orange and gold, they stood together looking out over the land. "It's going to take time," Eliza said. "Months, maybe longer, and there's no guarantee. I could be wrong about all of it." "But you don't think you are." "No," she admitted. "I don't." Caleb was quiet for a moment, then,
Porter said you were cursed, that everything you touch dies.
Eliza's expression didn't change. He wasn't entirely wrong. Things have died around me. My father, the family I worked for before Porter, even plants sometimes when I was still learning. She paused. But death's part of the cycle too. You can't have life without it. The trick is knowing which one you're feeding. And which one are you feeding now? She turned to look at him, and in the fading light, her face seemed younger somehow, less guarded. Life, she said simply. For the first time in a long while, I'm choosing life. They went back inside as darkness fell. Eliza made something resembling dinner from the meager supplies in Caleb's pantry: flour, salt pork, and dried beans transformed into something that actually tasted good. "You're a good cook," Caleb said, surprised. "My father couldn't boil water without burning it. I learned young or I starved." She sat across from him at the table, which suddenly felt less empty than it had in years. "What about you? What did you do before the land?" "This and that. Worked as a ranch hand for a while. Tried my hand at trapping. Met Sarah at a church social in Helena." He smiled at the memory. "She was singing in the choir, worst singer I'd ever heard, but she had this joy about her, like she knew something the rest of us didn't." "You loved her, more than I knew how to say." The admission came easier than he'd expected, which made losing her worse, I guess, because I'd finally found something worth holding on to, and then it was just gone. Eliza was quiet for a moment, then, "My father used to say that love isn't about holding on, it's about transformation, that the people we love change us, and that change stays even after they're gone." He sounds wise. He was. Also stubborn, obsessive, and completely impractical. But wise, yes. She smiled. He would have liked this place. Would have seen the challenge and gotten excited about it. Like you are now. Like I am now, she agreed. They finished eating in comfortable silence. Outside, wolves howled in the distance, a sound that would have seemed lonely a day ago but now just felt like part of the landscape. As Eliza cleaned the dishes, using snow heated over the fire, Caleb found himself watching her. Not in the way he'd watched Sarah. That had been something brighter, more innocent. This was different. This was recognition, like seeing someone who'd walked the same dark roads you had and come out the other side still standing. "What?" Eliza asked, catching him staring. "Nothing, just thinking." "Dangerous habit." "So I've been told." She dried her hands and came to sit by the fire. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Why me, specifically?" There were other ways to throw away $40. Why that particular bet? Caleb considered lying, then decided against it. "Because when Porter dragged you into that saloon, everyone laughed. Like you being treated as property was the funniest joke they'd heard all year, and I realized I'd become one of them. Not laughing, maybe, but not doing anything either, just sitting there watching the world happen. And that bothered you. More than it should have, probably. I've seen worse things. Done nothing about worse things." He stared into the fire. "But something about that moment, I don't know, felt like a choice. Like I could keep being the man who watches, or I could be something else. And you chose something else. Or something else chose me. Hard to tell the difference." Eliza leaned back against the wall, her eyes reflecting firelight. "I'm glad it did. Choose you, I mean. Or that you chose it, whichever. Even though you're stuck on a frozen mountain with a fool in his dead land. Especially because of that." She closed her eyes. "You know what the worst part of the last 2 years was? Not the hunger, or the cold, or even Porter's cruelty. It was the invisibility. Being something people looked through instead of at. You saw me tonight, Vance. Maybe you saved me, maybe you didn't. But you saw me. That's more than most people have done in a long time." Caleb didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing. Just sat with her in the firelight, listening to wind rattle the windows and wolves sing to the moon. Eventually, Eliza's breathing evened out into sleep. Caleb covered her with a blanket, then stepped outside into the cold. Behind the cabin, past the garden plot and the lean-to, stood a lone pine tree. Beneath it, marked with stones Caleb had carried up from the creek, were 2 graves. He knelt in the snow between them. "I did something today," he said quietly. "Something you probably would have called reckless. Gambled away our savings for a stranger.
He brushed snow off Sarah's marker. But I think maybe I'm done just surviving. Done waiting to die. You told me once that life was meant to be lived, not endured. Took me 3 years, but I think I finally understand what you meant. The wind was his only answer.
I'm going to try, Caleb continued. Going to try to make something of this place. Not just for me, for her too. For Eliza. She's got ideas, Sarah. Crazy ideas about the land, about making it work. And I think I'm going to help her try. He stood, knees aching from the cold. Wish me luck, he whispered. Then he turned and walked back to the cabin, where a fire burned warm and a woman who'd been property now slept free. And the future, uncertain, terrifying, and suddenly possible, waited to unfold. Inside, Caleb lay down on his blankets and stared at the ceiling. Tomorrow, Eliza would start her work in earnest. Would begin the slow process of trying to coax life from land that had resisted every other attempt. And Caleb would help her. Not because he believed it would work. Belief was still too fragile, too new. But because trying was better than surrendering. Because partnership was better than isolation. Because somewhere in the darkness of the last 3 years, he'd forgotten that hope wasn't about certainty. It was about choosing to plant seeds even when the ground looked dead. Even when everyone called you a fool. Even when the odds were against you. Especially then. Outside, snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in white. And beneath the frost, beneath the frozen earth, something waited. Not dead. Just sleeping. Just waiting for spring. Just waiting for someone to finally understand. The land, Caleb thought as sleep pulled him under, had been waiting for Eliza. And maybe he had been too. Winter didn't give up easy. The morning after that first night, Caleb woke to find ice on the inside of the windows, frost patterns like delicate fingers reaching across the glass. His breath came out in clouds, and every joint in his body ached from sleeping on the hard floor. But Eliza was already awake, crouched by the fire she'd rebuilt, studying a handful of soil she must have dug up from somewhere. It's not quite dawn, Caleb said, his voice rough with sleep. Best time to observe, Eliza replied without looking up. Before the sun changes everything. She let the soil sift through her fingers slowly, deliberately. You've got clay about 6 inches down. That's why water doesn't drain properly. Probably why your potatoes rotted before they ever had a chance. Caleb sat up, wincing as his back protested. You can tell all that from dirt? Soil, Eliza corrected. Dirt is what's under your fingernails. Soil is alive. She finally glanced at him. You look terrible. Thank you. I mean it. When's the last time you slept in an actual bed? Caleb had to think about it. Not sure. Year, maybe? Bed felt too big after... He stopped. Eliza nodded slowly, understanding without needing the rest of the sentence. We're trading tonight. You take the bed, I'll take the floor. And don't argue. A man can't work land if his back's broken. I'm fine. You're a liar. She stood, brushing her hands on her dress. But we'll fight about it later. Right now, I need you to show me every inch of this property, all 40 acres, and I need you to tell me everything you tried to grow and exactly where it failed. They spent the morning walking the land. The snow was knee-deep in places, and Caleb had to break trail for most of it. Eliza followed in his footsteps, pausing every few yards to dig down through the snow and examine what lay beneath. Wheat here, Caleb said, pointing to the eastern section. Planted 3 years running, never got higher than my knee before it yellowed and died. Eliza dug through the snow, pulled up frozen soil, smelled it. Actually smelled it, like it was bread or flowers or something worth breathing in. Too much runoff. See how the land slopes? Every time it rained, the topsoil washed down toward the creek. Your wheat was starving in its own bed. I tried terracing, but you didn't plant anything to hold the soil in place. She stood, surveying the slope with narrowed eyes. You were fighting the water instead of using it. Water wants to move downhill. That's what water does. Question is whether you're going to let it take your soil with it or give it something to hold on to. They moved to the southern section where Caleb had attempted corn. The results had been even worse. Stalks that barely reached waist height before something ate them from the inside out. Corn borers, Eliza said, examining the remnants of a stalk. They love monoculture. Plant nothing but corn, you're basically setting out a buffet. So corn's impossible here. No, corn's impossible here alone. But companion plant it with beans and squash, the Three Sisters method, and suddenly you've got beans fixing nitrogen, squash leaves shading out weeds, and enough diversity to confuse the pests. She dropped the stalk. Your problem isn't the land, Vance. It's that you've been trying to impose order on something that works better with managed chaos. They continued north, where the land grew rockier and steeper. This was the section Caleb had given up on entirely. Too many stones, too much slope, too close to the tree line, where deer and elk would destroy anything edible. But Eliza's eyes lit up when she saw it. This, she said, spreading her arms wide. This is perfect. For what? Breaking ankles? For berries, huckleberries, serviceberries, wild strawberries. They love rocky soil and partial shade, and the slope means good drainage. She turned in a slow circle, and Caleb could almost see the plans forming behind her eyes. We plant berry bushes here. They'll stabilize the soil, attract pollinators, and give us food without competing with the crops below. Plus, berries are worth more per pound than wheat. People will travel for fresh berries. If they grow, they'll grow, Eliza said with such certainty that Caleb almost believed her. By the time they completed the circuit, the sun was high and weak, offering light but no warmth. Caleb's fingers were numb inside his gloves, and his boots were soaked through from the snow. But Eliza looked energized, almost feverish with plans. I need paper, she said as they trudged back toward the cabin. And something to write with. A pencil, charcoal, anything. Caleb found her an old ledger he'd used to track expenses back when he still believed the land would produce something worth selling. The pages were mostly empty, a record of failure written in increasingly desperate handwriting. Eliza flipped to a blank page and started drawing. Not neat diagrams, but rough sketches that somehow captured what she was describing better than words could. Here, she said, pointing to the eastern slope. We terrace this section, but we don't plant in the terraces. We plant on the edges. Willow stakes for erosion control, clover between the rows for nitrogen. The terraces themselves become catchments for water. Let it pool, let it sink in slowly instead of running off. Her pencil moved faster. Southern section, Three Sisters Guild, but we stagger the planting times, early corn, late beans, pumpkins instead of summer squash, because they store better. Ring the whole thing with sunflowers to attract beneficial insects and confuse the deer about where the real food is. And the rocky northern section? Caleb asked, watching her work. Berries, like I said, but also herbs. Yarrow, chamomile, wild mint. Things that like poor soil and dry conditions. They'll fill in the gaps between the berry bushes, keep the weeds down, and half of them have medicinal value. Your land's not just going to feed people, it's going to heal them. She kept drawing, kept talking, and Caleb found himself getting pulled into the vision despite his doubts. This wasn't farming as he'd understood it. This was something stranger, more ambitious, more alive. How long? He asked when she finally paused. How long before any of this produces something? Eliza set down the pencil and looked at him squarely. Berries, maybe late summer, if we're lucky. Three Sisters, late September. The terraces won't show results until next year. Soil building takes time. She paused. We're going to be hungry, Vance. This spring, this summer. We're going to be living on whatever you've got stored and whatever I can forage. It's going to be hard. Hard I can do, Caleb said. Impossible is where I start to worry. Good thing this isn't impossible, then. She turned back to her sketches. Just improbable. That night, true to her word, Eliza forced Caleb into the bed while she took the floor. He protested, but she had a stubbornness that matched his own. You've been sleeping on the ground for a year, she said flatly. One more night won't kill me, but you trying to work land with a broken back will kill both of us. Now shut up and sleep. Caleb did. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, he didn't dream about graves. The next weeks fell into a pattern. Caleb would wake before dawn to find Eliza already working, sometimes sketching new plans, sometimes just sitting outside in the cold, watching the land like it might tell her secrets if she stayed quiet enough. They ate breakfast together, usually just porridge made from the dwindling oat supply, sometimes with a bit of salt pork, if Caleb's hunting had been successful. Then they'd work. The work was strange, not farming, not yet, preparing, planning. Caleb hauled rocks from the northern section and used them to build the frames for future terraces. Eliza marked out guilds with stakes and string, creating patterns that looked random to Caleb but that she swore had purpose. "You're mapping water flow," she explained one afternoon, standing in the middle of what would become the Three Sisters section. "See how the ground's slightly lower here? In spring, when the snow melts, water's going to pool. So we plant the thirstiest crops, the squash, in the low spots. Corn on the higher ground where drainage is better. Beans in between because they don't care much either way." "How do you know all this?" "Told you. My father was obsessed with ecosystems. Spent 20 years studying how plants interact in the wild, trying to figure out why nature's farms worked better than human ones." She pounded another stake into the frozen ground. "He published papers, gave lectures. Everyone said his ideas were brilliant. But brilliant doesn't pay bills, especially not when you're trying to raise a daughter alone." Her expression was distant. "He died broke, Vance. Brilliant and broke. Sometimes I wonder if his knowledge was worth more than the poverty it brought us." "You're using it now." "Yeah." She smiled slightly. "Maybe that's the point. Maybe knowledge isn't about what it's worth to you. It's about what you can do with it for someone else." They worked until the light failed, then ate dinner, usually whatever Caleb could provide from his dwindling stores, plus whatever Eliza could improvise. She had a gift for making nothing taste like something, for turning the last scraps of dried venison and withered carrots into soup that actually filled the belly. After dinner, they'd sit by the fire and talk. Or sometimes just sit. Caleb found he didn't mind the silence when it was shared with someone else. There was a difference between lonely quiet and companionable quiet, and he was relearning which was which. "Tell me about Sarah," Eliza said one night, about 2 weeks after arriving. Caleb stiffened. "Why?" "Because you loved her. Because she's part of your story." Eliza was mending a tear in her dress, the only dress she owned. "And because if we're going to live together, work together, maybe survive together, we should probably know the ghosts we're both carrying." Caleb was quiet for a long time, then, "She was stubborn. That's the first thing you need to know. Once she decided on something, there was no changing her mind. I wanted to stay in Helena, where there was work, a community, doctors. But she wanted land, wanted to build something that was ours. So you came here." "So I came here." He smiled at the memory. "First winter nearly killed us. We ran out of firewood in January, had to burn the furniture just to stay warm. Sarah laughed about it, said we'd just build better furniture come spring." "Did you?" "Never got the chance. She got pregnant that February. Was sick almost the whole time, but she was happy. Started making plans for the baby, talking about how we'd teach her. She was sure it was a girl. How to love the land like she did." His voice cracked slightly. "She went into labor in late October. Everything seemed fine at first, but then..." He stopped. Eliza waited. "She bled," Caleb finally said. "Just bled, and there was nothing I could do. Rode to town for the doctor, but by the time we got back, she was gone. Baby lasted another hour, then she went too." He stared into the fire. "I buried them under the pine tree out back. Only tree on the property tall enough to mark the spot." "I'm sorry." "Everyone's sorry. Doesn't change anything." "No," Eliza agreed. "It doesn't." She set down her mending. "You want to know my ghosts?" "Only if you want to tell them." She pulled her knees to her chest, staring into the flames. "After my father died, I worked for a family named Morrison. Good people, or so I thought. They needed someone to manage their kitchen garden, help with the cooking, said they'd pay fair wages." She laughed bitterly. "Lasted 3 months before Mr. Morrison decided wages weren't necessary, that my room and board should be payment enough. When I objected, he decided other forms of payment would work just fine." Caleb's jaw tightened. "I ran," Eliza continued. "Made it maybe 20 miles before I realized I had no money, no food, nowhere to go. That's when I met Porter. He offered work, promised it would be legitimate, and for a while it was. Then the work dried up and the promises turned into debts I didn't owe and contracts I didn't understand until it was too late. And then I won you in a card game." "And then you won me in a card game," she agreed, "which should have been worse, should have been the lowest point, but somehow it wasn't." She looked at him. "You know why?" "Why?" "Because you gave me a choice. First time in 2 years, someone treated me like I had agency, like what I wanted mattered." She smiled. "Even if what I wanted was to dig in your frozen dirt at dawn and plan gardens that might not grow." They sat in silence after that, both lost in their own thoughts. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters. Winter was tightening its grip, and supplies were running lower every day. Caleb had maybe 3 weeks of food left if they were careful, a month if they starved themselves slowly. "We're going to be hungry," Eliza said quietly, echoing her earlier warning. "Come March, maybe April, we're going to be very hungry." "I know. You ever been truly hungry, Vance? Not just missing a meal or two, but starving, the kind where your body starts eating itself?" "No," Caleb admitted. "I have." Her voice was matter-of-fact. "It changes you, makes you desperate, makes you do things you swore you'd never do." She looked at him. "I need you to promise me something." "What?" "If it comes to that, if we're at the edge and there's no other choice, I need you to promise you'll go to town. Sell something, borrow money, whatever it takes. Don't let pride kill us." "I'm not a prideful man." "Everyone's prideful about something." She stood, preparing her bedding for the night. "Just promise me you'll remember that survival beats dignity, every time." "I promise." But even as he said it, Caleb wondered what he'd actually do when the time came, because dignity was sometimes all a man had left. The first real test came 3 weeks later. Caleb was checking his traps in the forest north of the property when he heard hoofbeats. Multiple horses, moving fast. He barely had time to step behind a tree before 3 riders appeared on the trail. He recognized the lead rider immediately. Victor Hale. Caleb had never spoken to the man, but everyone in the territory knew him. Wealthy, powerful, the kind of person who owned more land than he could see from his front porch and was always looking to own more. The 2 men riding with Hale looked like hired muscle, thick-shouldered, hard-eyed, the kind of men who settled disputes with fists instead of words. They stopped maybe 30 yards from where Caleb stood hidden. "This is the Vance property?" Hale asked. His voice was smooth, educated, nothing like the rough frontier speech Caleb was used to. "Markers say so," one of the hired men replied. 40 acres, bought 4 years back. Not worth much from what I hear. Land won't grow spit." "Land's worth what someone's willing to pay for it," Hale said, "and I'm willing to pay quite a bit, assuming we can convince Mr. Vance to sell." "And if he won't?" Hale smiled. "Then we convince him harder." They rode on, heading toward the cabin. Caleb waited until they were out of sight, then moved fast. He knew a shortcut that would get him home quicker than following the trail. He ran, branches whipping his face, lungs burning in the cold air. He burst into the clearing just as Hale and his men were dismounting in front of the cabin. Eliza stood in the doorway, and Caleb's heart nearly stopped. She looked so small compared to the 3 men, so vulnerable. "Can I help you?" she'd asked, and her voice was steady. Caleb had to give her that. No fear showed through. Hale swept off his hat in an exaggerated gesture of courtesy. "Ma'am, I'm looking for Caleb Vance. This his property?" "It is," Caleb said, stepping into the clearing. All 3 men turned to look at him. "And you're trespassing on it." "Mr. Vance," Hale's smile was all teeth. "A pleasure. I've heard interesting things about you." "I doubt that." "Oh, but I have. They say you're the fool who gambled his last dollar for a woman." Hale's eyes slid to Eliza. "They say you won something worthless and called it victory." "They say a lot of things," Caleb replied. His hand moved instinctively toward the rifle leaning against the cabin wall, still 10 feet away. "Most of it's lies." "Perhaps." Hale dismounted with the ease of someone who'd been on horses his whole life. "I'm not here to discuss your gambling habits, Mr. Vance. I'm here to make you an offer. A generous offer for land that, by all accounts, is worthless." "Land's not for sale." "You haven't heard the price." "Doesn't matter what the price is." Hale's smile thinned slightly. "Mr. Vance, I'm trying to be reasonable here. Your land produces nothing. You're barely surviving on what I assume are rapidly dwindling supplies. Winter's only half over. Come spring, you'll be broke and starving, assuming you make it that long." He pulled a paper from his coat. "I'm offering you $500, enough to start over somewhere more hospitable, somewhere your companion might have better prospects." $500. It was more money than Caleb had seen in years, more money than the land was worth by any reasonable estimate. But Caleb thought about Eliza's plans, about terraces and guilds and berry bushes that hadn't been planted yet. About the possibility, however slim, that something might actually grow here. No, he said. I'm sorry? I said no, land's not for sale. Hale's expression hardened. Mr. Vance, I don't think you understand the situation. I understand fine. You want my land. I'm not selling. Situation's pretty clear. One of Hale's men shifted, hand moving toward a gun at his hip. Eliza stepped out of the doorway, and Caleb saw she was holding his hunting knife. Small, but sharp, and the way she held it suggested she knew how to use it. There's no need for violence, Hale said, though his eyes tracked the knife. I'm simply trying to help you see reason. Then help from a distance, Caleb said. Off my property. For a long moment, nobody moved. The only sound was wind through the pines and the nervous stamping of horses. Then Hale smiled again, but this time there was nothing friendly about it. You're making a mistake, Mr. Vance. This land will kill you. Better to sell it to someone who can actually make use of it. I'll take my chances. Will you? Hale's eyes moved to Eliza again. What about her chances? You willing to watch her starve because of your pride? My choices are my own, Eliza said before Caleb could respond. Her voice cut like the knife she held. And I choose to stay. Now get off our land before I make you bleed for the privilege of refusing. Hale actually laughed at that. You've got spirit. I like that. He turned back to Caleb. The offer stands for 1 week. After that, the price goes down. Way down. Think about it, Mr. Vance. Think hard. He mounted his horse with practiced ease. His men followed suit. As they rode away, Hale called back over his shoulder, Interesting woman you've got there. Be a shame if something happened to her. The threat hung in the air long after the hoofbeats faded. Caleb and Eliza stood in silence, watching the forest where the riders had disappeared. That was Victor Hale, Caleb said finally. I figured. He's going to be a problem. Probably. Eliza lowered the knife but didn't put it away. Why does he want this land so badly? You said yourself it doesn't produce anything. No idea. Maybe he just likes owning things. Caleb moved to retrieve his rifle, feeling foolish for leaving it so far away. Or maybe he knows something we don't. Like what? Like maybe there's something valuable here. Minerals, maybe. Or water rights. He checked the rifle's load, a habit born from years of frontier living. Or maybe he just doesn't like the idea of someone telling him no. Eliza finally put the knife down. Her hands were shaking slightly, Caleb noticed. The bravery she'd shown was real, but it had cost her. You should have taken the money, she said quietly. What? $500, Vance. That's a fortune. You could start over somewhere better. Find land that actually wants to grow things. We've got land right here. Land that might not produce anything. Land that might kill us both. She turned to look at him, and her eyes were bright with something that might have been tears or might have been anger. I'm not worth starving for. I'm not worth dying for. That's not your decision to make. The hell it isn't. This is my life too. Exactly, Caleb said. Your life, not Hale's, not Porter's, yours. And if you want to leave, you can leave. But I'm not selling this land to that son of a bitch just because he showed up with threats and money. Why not? Why is this worthless patch of rock worth more to you than $500? Caleb had to think about that. Really think about it. Because, he finally said, for 3 years I've been giving up. Piece by piece. First Sarah and the baby, then the crops, then hope. Then any idea that tomorrow might be better than today. He met her eyes. You showed up and gave me a reason to stop giving up. Maybe the land won't produce. Maybe we will starve. But at least we'll starve trying to build something instead of just existing. Eliza stared at him for a long moment. Then she laughed, but it was an exhausted sound. We're both insane, you know that, right? Probably. Definitely. She walked past him into the cabin. Come on, we've got work to do. If we're going to starve to death, we might as well do it productively. That night, they ate the last of the salt pork and most of the remaining beans. Neither mentioned it, but both knew what it meant. The supplies were nearly gone. They had maybe 2 weeks left if they stretched everything as far as it would go. After dinner, Eliza returned to her sketches, refining plans by firelight. What are you doing? Caleb asked. Planning for spring. Someone has to be optimistic around here. We might not make it to spring. Then we better work faster. She didn't look up from the ledger. I've been thinking about what Hale said, about why he wants this land. And? And I think he knows something, or suspects something. She tapped the pencil against her teeth. Your land's at elevation, good water access from the mountain runoff. If he's planning to expand his holdings, this property would be a strategic acquisition, cuts right through the middle of what he already owns. So it's not about the land itself. It's about position. Exactly. Which means he's not going to give up just because you said no once. She finally looked at him. He's going to come back, Vance, and next time he might not ask nicely. Let him come. You can't fight Victor Hale. He owns half the territory, has the law in his pocket. Then what do you suggest? Eliza set down the pencil. We make the land worth keeping. We make it produce something so valuable that selling becomes unthinkable. We prove everyone wrong. In 2 weeks? With no food? And however long it takes. Her jaw set with determination. I'm not running again. I'm tired of running. If Hale wants this land, he's going to have to take it over my dead body. That might be exactly what he has in mind. Then he better bring more than 2 hired thugs. Caleb almost smiled at that. You're fiercer than you look. I've had to be. She returned to her sketches. Now shut up and let me work. Some of us are trying to save our lives here. The week passed. Hale didn't return, but his threat hung over everything like a storm cloud. Caleb set traps, checked lines, hunted every day. He managed to bring down a deer on the 5th day, scrawny and tough, but meat was meat. It would buy them another week, maybe 2 if they were careful. Eliza continued planning, but now she also started preparing. She collected seeds from the surrounding forest, pine nuts, wild grass seeds, anything that might be useful come spring. She dried the deer meat using techniques Caleb had never seen, mixing it with berries she'd somehow found under the snow to create something that would last months. Where did you learn that? He asked, watching her work. Spent a summer with a Salish woman when I was 12. My father was studying native plant usage. She taught me more about survival in 3 months than most people learn in a lifetime. Eliza hung another strip of meat near the fire. White people treat the land like an enemy to be conquered, but the people who've lived here for generations treat it like family. There's a difference. You think that's our problem? We're fighting when we should be cooperating? I think that's everyone's problem. She turned to look at him. This whole territory is built on the idea that nature needs to be tamed, controlled, bent to human will. But nature doesn't bend. It breaks or it adapts. Question is whether we're smart enough to adapt with it. On the 7th day Hale's deadline, they woke to find something waiting on their doorstep. A dead crow. Its neck wrung, its body positioned deliberately where they'd have to step over it to leave the cabin. Eliza stared at it, her face pale. What is it? Caleb asked. A message. Her voice was tight. Where I come from, a dead crow on your doorstep means someone's marked you, means they're coming for you, and you should run before they arrive. Porter? Or Hale? Or both? She kicked the bird aside, but her hands were shaking. Doesn't matter who, message is the same. Caleb picked up the crow, examined it. The neck had been broken cleanly, professionally. This is meant to scare us. It's working. Then we don't let them see it's working. He threw the bird into the forest as far as he could. They want us afraid, want us to make mistakes. We don't give them that. And if they come back with more than dead birds, then we deal with it. Caleb checked his rifle again. It had become a nervous habit. But we don't run, we don't sell, we stay and we fight. Even if fighting gets us killed, especially then. He looked at her. You said you were tired of running, so was I. Time we both meant it. Eliza nodded slowly. Then she walked back into the cabin and emerged with the hunting knife. She spent the next hour sharpening it on a whetstone, the scrape of metal on stone filling the cold air with purpose. They were still sharpening weapons when they heard horses approaching. But this time it wasn't Hale. It was Cyrus Webb, the cattle rancher from town, along with Martin Cross, the blacksmith. Both men looked uncomfortable, like they'd rather be anywhere else. Vance, Cyrus called out as he dismounted, we need to talk. About? About Victor Hale, about what he's planning. Cyrus glanced at Eliza, then back to Caleb. And about how maybe you're not as big a fool as everyone thought. Caleb gestured for the men to come inside, though the cabin barely had room for 4 people. Martin had to duck to avoid hitting his head on the doorframe, and Cyrus kept his hat in his hands, turning it nervously like a wheel.
Coffee? Eliza offered, though they all knew there wasn't any. It was just the thing you said when men showed up unexpected.
We're fine, Cyrus said quickly. He looked at Caleb, then at Eliza, then back at Caleb like he was trying to figure out how to start. Look, we heard about Hale's visit. Word travels fast in McGrath's. I imagine it does, Caleb said. Thing is, Martin cut in, his voice rough as gravel, Hale's been making moves, buying up land all over the territory. Sometimes he asks nice. Sometimes he doesn't ask at all. Just shows up with legal papers claiming water rights or some such, and suddenly you're off land your family's worked for 20 years. Happened to the Hendersons last fall, Cyrus added. They had a spread up near Rattlesnake Creek. Good land, producing well. Hale wanted it for the water access. They refused to sell. He paused. Barn burned down a week later, lost everything, had no choice but to sell after that, and Hale got it for half what it was worth. Eliza's hand moved to the knife she'd been sharpening. You think he'll burn us out? Don't know what he'll do, Martin said, but we know what he's capable of. And we figured you should too. Why tell us? Caleb asked. Why come all the way out here? The two men exchanged a look. Finally, Cyrus spoke. Because we were wrong. About you. About her. He nodded toward Eliza. Night you won that card game, we thought you were the biggest fool in Montana. Thought you'd thrown your life away for nothing. And now? Now we're thinking maybe you saw something we didn't. Martin shifted his weight, making the floorboards creak. Ran into Jack Porter 3 days ago. He was dying, Vance, coughing up blood in an alley behind the saloon. Kept saying the same thing over and over. What thing? That he'd made a mistake. That the woman he'd gambled away was worth more than gold. That she knew things. Martin looked at Eliza with something close to respect. He died that night. Last words were about how he'd thrown away his only chance at survival. The cabin went quiet except for the fire crackling. Porter was a bastard, Eliza said finally, her voice flat. But he wasn't stupid. He knew what I could do. He just didn't care until it was too late. What can you do? Cyrus asked. And it wasn't mocking. It was genuine curiosity. Eliza looked at Caleb, asking permission with her eyes. He nodded. I can make things grow, she said simply, in places where nothing should grow. I can read soil like you read a newspaper. I can look at land everyone's given up on and see what it needs to come alive. She moved to the table where her sketches lay. This property everyone calls worthless, by summer it'll be producing more food per acre than anything in the territory. Martin laughed, but it died when he saw she wasn't joking. That's impossible. No, it's just improbable. She spread out the sketches. See these terraces? They'll catch and hold water instead of letting it run off. These guilds here, 3 sisters planting, they'll feed each other, support each other. And this northern section with the berry bushes, that alone could generate enough income to sustain a family through winter. Cyrus leaned over the sketches, his eyes scanning the drawings. Where'd you learn this? My father spent his life studying it. I spent my life watching him. Eliza's finger traced the lines she'd drawn. Most farmers try to simplify nature, control it. But nature doesn't work in straight lines. It works in networks, relationships, cooperation. You work with it instead of against it, and suddenly the impossible becomes just difficult. And if it doesn't work? Martin asked. Then we starve, Caleb said bluntly. But at least we'll starve trying something new instead of repeating the same failures everyone else has. Cyrus straightened up, still holding his hat. Hale's planning something. Don't know what yet, but men like him don't give up easy, especially not when someone tells them no. Let him plan, Eliza said. There was steel in her voice now. We've got our own plans. After the men left, promising to keep their ears open for any news about Hale's movements, Caleb and Eliza stood in the doorway watching them ride away. You trust them? Eliza asked. Not sure, but I don't think they're working for Hale, if that's what you're asking. Everyone works for Hale eventually, if he wants them to. She turned back inside. Men like that, they own things. Land, loyalty, sometimes even the law. You can't fight that with good intentions. Then what do you fight it with? Eliza picked up her sketches, rolled them carefully. You make yourself too valuable to destroy. You become something people need more than they fear him. She met his eyes. We make this land bloom, Vance. We make it so productive, so successful, that losing it would hurt everyone in the territory. Then hail can't touch us without touching them too. That's a hell of a gamble. So it was a card game in a smoke-filled saloon. She almost smiled. Besides, we're good at gambling. We're still alive, aren't we? The weeks that followed were brutal. Spring was coming, but winter wasn't finished. Snow fell, melted, fell again. The temperature swung wildly, freezing at night, barely tolerable during the day. They worked anyway. Caleb finished the terrace frames on the eastern slope, his hands bleeding from hauling rocks until Eliza forced him to stop and wrap them. She spent hours in the forest, returning with cuttings and roots she'd somehow located under the snow. Willow stakes, she explained, showing him the thin branches she'd collected. We plant these along the terrace edges. They'll root, grow, hold the soil in place. Plus, willows are fast. We'll see growth this year instead of waiting 5.
If they survive. They'll survive. Willow's nearly impossible to kill. She began preparing the stakes, cutting them to length with Caleb's knife. You know what the secret to survival is, Vance? What? Being too stubborn to die. She smiled slightly. I think this land and I have that in common.
By early March, their food situation had become critical. The deer meat was gone. The beans were gone. They were living on what Eliza could forage: pine nuts, the inner bark of certain trees, roots that tasted like dirt but provided calories. Caleb's stomach hurt constantly. He'd lost weight, though he tried to hide it from Eliza. She'd lost weight too. Her face gaunt, her movements slower than before, but she never stopped working. One morning, Caleb woke to find her gone. Panic seized him. Visions of Hale's men taking her in the night, of her collapsing somewhere in the forest, of 100 terrible possibilities. He found her an hour later, 3 miles into the mountains, digging in a small clearing. "What are you doing?" His voice came out sharper than intended, fear making him angry. "Ramps," she said, not looking up. "Wild leeks. They grow in clusters like this." She pulled up a plant, showed him the small white bulb. "These will save us, Vance. They're nutritious, they multiply fast, and we can transplant some back to the property." "You walked 3 miles for onions?" "I walked 3 miles for food." She kept digging, her hands raw and muddy. "And for proof." "Proof of what?" "That I know what I'm doing, that I'm not just making this up as I go." She sat back, wiping her forehead with the back of her hand. "You're losing faith. I can see it. Every day you look a little more doubtful, like you're waiting for me to admit this is all impossible." "I never said—" "You don't have to say it. It's in your eyes." She stood, holding the ramps carefully. "So I'm showing you. Even in March, in the mountains, there's food if you know where to look. And if there's food now, imagine what's possible when everything's actually growing." They walked back in silence. When they reached the cabin, Eliza made soup from the ramps, adding the last of their salt and some pine needles for flavor. It tasted like the forest, wild and strange, but it was the first meal that had actually filled Caleb's belly in weeks. "I'm sorry," he said as they ate. "For what?" "For doubting. For—" He struggled to find words. "For being human, I guess. Being human's not something to apologize for." Eliza finished her soup, scraping the bowl clean. "We're allowed to doubt. Allowed to be scared. We're just not allowed to quit." That night, the first real thaw came. They could hear it, the sound of ice breaking, water moving, the mountain shedding winter like old skin. Eliza stood outside long after dark, listening to something Caleb couldn't hear. "It's starting," she said when he joined her. "The land's waking up." "How can you tell?" "The water. Hear how it's moving? That's snow melt from higher elevations. It'll be here by tomorrow, running down through our property." She turned to him, and in the moonlight her eyes were bright. "Tomorrow, we start planting." "It's too early. We'll get more snow." "We'll get more snow, but between now and then, there's a window. 3 days, maybe 4. Just enough to get certain things in the ground." She was already moving, planning. "The willow stakes have to go in while the soil's wet. The ramps will transplant to the shaded areas. And I need you to help me with something else." "What?" She led him to the northern section where the land was rockiest. "We're going to build cairns, stone markers, but not random, specific patterns. They'll create microclimates, warm pockets where we can start the berry bushes early." They worked through the night. By dawn, they'd placed 24 cairns across the northern slope, each one positioned to catch sun and shelter the ground behind it from wind. Caleb's hands were raw, his back screaming, but there was something almost magical about watching the sun rise over those stone markers, like they'd planted promises in the earth. "Now what?" he asked as they stood surveying their work. "Now we wait 3 hours for the ground to warm. Then we plant." Eliza was swaying on her feet from exhaustion. "Go sleep, Vance. I'll wake you when it's time." "What about you?" "I'll sleep after. Someone needs to watch the water flow, make sure it's going where we need it." Caleb wanted to argue, but he could barely keep his eyes open. He stumbled to the cabin and collapsed on the bed without even removing his boots. When Eliza woke him, the sun was high and warm, the first genuinely warm day since October. "It's time," she said. They planted willow stakes along every terrace edge, pushing them deep into mud that had been frozen solid just days before. Caleb's hands bled again, but he didn't care. There was something primal about the work, something that connected him to every farmer who'd ever worked land, ever tried to coax life from soil. The ramps went into the shaded areas near the cabin. Eliza showed him how to space them, how deep to plant. "They'll spread naturally. Give them 3 years, and we'll have more than we can use. We'll be trading them to people in town. If we're still here in 3 years. We'll be here?" She said it with such certainty that Caleb almost believed her. On the 3rd day of the thaw, they planted the first berry bushes. Eliza had found wild huckleberry and serviceberry plants in the forest, carefully dug them up, wrapped their roots in moss. "These are younger plants," she explained as they worked. 3, maybe 4 years old. They'll establish faster than starting from seed. If we're lucky, we might see a few berries this summer. And if we're not lucky, then we see them next summer. She positioned a bush carefully, making sure its roots spread properly. "Patience is part of farming, Vance. You plant knowing you might not see the harvest. You do it anyway." By the 4th day, new snow was falling, but the plants were in the ground, the stakes were set, and the land looked different somehow. Not transformed, not yet, but like it was getting ready for something. They spent the next weeks maintaining their work, checking on the willow stakes to make sure they hadn't been knocked loose by wind or foraging animals, protecting the transplanted ramps from late frost, watching the berry bushes for any signs of distress. And slowly, impossibly, things began to happen. The willow stakes started showing green. Tiny buds appeared on branches that had looked dead just weeks before. Some of the stakes didn't make it. About a quarter of them stayed brown and lifeless, but the rest were rooting, growing, becoming something more than sticks in the ground. Eliza nearly cried when she saw the first buds. "It's working," she whispered. "It's actually working." The ramps pushed up through the soil around the cabin, small green shoots that smelled sharp and clean. Eliza wouldn't let them harvest any yet. "They need to establish. We eat them now. We're eating our future." The berry bushes were slower, more cautious, but they didn't die, and in frontier farming, not dying counted as success. By late April, Caleb could see the difference in the land. The terraces were holding water, just like Eliza had predicted, creating small pools that would feed the crops all summer. The willow stakes had grown into actual stakes, some of them already 2 feet tall. And the northern section, with its stone cairns and berry bushes, looked almost intentional, like someone had planned it instead of just letting nature do whatever it wanted. Word spread. Caleb didn't know how. They rarely went to town, barely saw anyone. But somehow people heard that the crazy fool on the worthless mountain land was trying something new, and that it might actually be working. The first visitor was an older woman named Ruth Jenkins. She rode up alone on a mule that looked as old as she was, her face weathered by 6 decades of frontier life. "Heard you got plants growing where they shouldn't," she said without preamble. "Came to see if it's true." Eliza showed her the terraces, the guilds, the berry bushes. Ruth walked the property slowly, examining everything with the eye of someone who'd spent a lifetime working soil. "Well, I'll be damned," she said finally. "You actually know what you're doing." "Thank you," Eliza said, clearly surprised by the compliment. "Didn't say it would work, just said you know what you're doing. Big difference." Ruth's eyes were sharp. "You planning to sell what you grow?" "Haven't thought that far ahead yet." "Better start thinking, because if half of what you're trying actually produces, you'll have more food than 2 people can eat. Question is what you do with the surplus." "Trade it, I suppose," Caleb said. "Trade it where?" "Town's 2 hours away. Food spoils." Ruth scratched her chin. You'd need connections. People who could distribute for you. Take a cut, but get your goods to market. You offering? Eliza asked. Maybe, if the food's any good. Ruth climbed back on her mule. Also came to warn you. Hale's been asking questions. About you. About what you're doing up here. Doesn't seem happy about all the attention you're getting. We're not trying to get attention. Don't matter what you're trying to do. Matters what you're actually doing. Ruth turned her mule toward the trail. And what you're doing is making people think. Making them wonder if maybe there's a different way to work land. Men like Hale hate that. Hate it when people start thinking for themselves. She rode off, leaving them standing in the yard. She's right, Eliza said quietly. The more successful we are, the more dangerous we become. To Hale. To the way things have always been done. So what do? We keep working, keep growing, and we prepare for whatever's coming. She looked at him. Because something's coming, Vance. I can feel it. She was right. 2 days later, a man from town arrived with a letter. Official-looking, sealed with wax. The kind of letter that never brought good news. Caleb opened it with shaking hands. It was from a lawyer. Someone named Harrison Finch, representing Victor Hale. The language was dense, full of words like wherefore and heretofore, but the meaning was clear enough. Hale was claiming that Eliza wasn't free, that she was still legally bound to Jack Porter's estate, and since Porter had died with debts, and since those debts had been purchased by Hale, Eliza now belonged to him. This is impossible, Eliza said, reading over Caleb's shoulder. Porter's dead. The debt died with him. Apparently not. Caleb read it again, trying to find a loophole. Says here that Porter signed over his interest in you as collateral for a loan. When he defaulted, the collateral, you, transferred to the lender. Who was Hale? Who was Hale? Caleb crumpled the letter. This is garbage. You can't own a person. Slavery's been illegal for decades. Not slavery. Indentured servitude. There's a difference, legally. Eliza's voice was steady, but her hands weren't. If Porter did sign a contract, and knowing him he probably did, and if that contract transferred upon default, then legally, she trailed off. Then legally you belong to Hale, Caleb finished. They stood in silence, the letter between them like a bomb waiting to explode. We could fight it, Caleb said. Take it to court. With what money? Against Hale's lawyers? Eliza laughed bitterly. We'd lose. You know we'd lose. So what, you just go with him? Let him win. I don't know. The words came out sharp, loud. Eliza almost never raised her voice. I don't know what to do, Vance. I don't have any good options here. Caleb's mind raced. There had to be a way out. Had to be something they could do. Then it hit him. Marry me, he said. Eliza stared at him like he'd lost his mind. What? Marry me. Right now. If you're married, you're not property. You're a wife. Legally a different person than the one in Porter's contract. That's insane. So is everything else we've been doing. Caleb grabbed her hands. They were cold, shaking. Think about it. Hale's claim is based on you being single, unattached, bound by Porter's contract. But if you're married, the contract's void. You can't be owned by one man if you're legally partnered with another. I don't... Eliza pulled her hands back. Vance, that's not how marriage works. You don't just marry someone to solve a legal problem. Why not? People marry for worse reasons. Money, land, convenience. At least this way we're doing it to protect someone. To protect me, you mean? Yes. To protect you. He stepped closer. Look, I'm not asking you to love me. I'm not asking for anything except the legal protection marriage provides. We keep living exactly like we have been. Partners, friends, whatever this is. But on paper, you're safe. Eliza was quiet for a long time. Outside wind moved through the young willow trees, making them whisper. The land, she finally said. What? If we marry, the land becomes partly mine, legally. Which means if Hale comes after it, he's coming after both of us. Makes it more complicated for him. Didn't think of that, but yes. And if I say no, if I refuse, Caleb felt something twist in his chest. Then you refuse, and I'll help you run. We'll take whatever supplies we can carry and head for Canada or California or wherever you want to go. But I won't let Hale take you like property, not while I'm breathing.
Eliza studied his face like she was trying to read something written there. You mean that? Every word.
You'd give up the land, the work, everything we've built. For me. In a heartbeat. She laughed, but it was a broken sound. You really are the biggest fool in Montana. Probably. Definitely. She took a deep breath. Okay. Okay? Okay, I'll marry you. She held up a hand. But we do it right. Not just for legal protection, but because if we're going to fight Hale, we fight with everything we have, including the truth. What truth? That I want to be here. That I choose this land, this work, this life. She looked around at the terraces, the young trees, the berry bushes. That I choose you. Caleb felt something in his chest that might have been hope or might have been terror. When? Tomorrow. We ride to town, find whoever can marry us legally, and we do it before Hale has time to make another move. She met his eyes. But Vance, I need you to understand something. What? This might make things worse, might make Hale angrier. He could come after us harder, use more force. Her jaw set. Are you ready for that? Caleb thought about Sarah, about the graves under the pine tree, about 3 years of giving up, of letting life happen to him instead of living it. I'm ready, he said. They rode to town before dawn, reaching it just as the sun broke over the mountains. The streets were mostly empty, a few early risers tending to morning chores, smoke rising from chimneys. Caleb led them to the home of Judge Morrison, the only person in town legally authorized to perform marriages. The judge answered the door in his nightshirt, bleary-eyed and irritated. This better be important, Vance. It is. Need you to marry us. Morrison blinked. What? Right now? Right now. The judge looked from Caleb to Eliza and back again. You know there's normally paperwork, waiting periods. Can you do it or not? Eliza interrupted. Legally, today. Morrison scratched his chin. I can, won't be fancy, and I'll need witnesses. Get them, Caleb said. An hour later, they stood in Morrison's parlor with Cyrus Webb and Martin Cross serving as witnesses. The judge had changed into proper clothes and found his legal documents. Do you, Caleb Vance, take this woman? Morrison paused. What's your full name, miss? Eliza Marie Hart. Do you take Eliza Marie Hart to be your lawfully wedded wife, for better or worse, richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, till death do you part? Caleb looked at Eliza. Her dress was still dirty from planting, her hair only partially brushed, dark circles under her eyes from too many sleepless nights. She looked exhausted, half-starved, and absolutely fierce. I do, he said. And do you, Eliza Marie Hart, take Caleb Vance to be your lawfully wedded husband, for better or worse, richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, till death do you part? Eliza's hand found Caleb's. Her fingers were rough from work, scarred from handling tools and thorns and frozen soil. I do, she said clearly. Then by the power vested in me by the territory of Montana, I pronounce you husband and wife. Morrison closed his book. You may kiss the bride. Caleb and Eliza looked at each other. They hadn't discussed this part, hadn't thought beyond the legal necessity. Eliza leaned forward and kissed his cheek. It was brief, almost sisterly, but her hand squeezed his, and Caleb understood what she was saying without words. This is real. We're in this together now, whatever comes next. They signed the documents. Morrison filed them officially, making the marriage legal in every sense that mattered. As they left, Cyrus pulled Caleb aside. You know what you just did? Got married. You just declared war. Cyrus's face was serious. Hale's going to see this as a direct challenge. He'll come at you harder than before. Let him come. He will, and when he does, you better be ready. Cyrus glanced at Eliza, who was talking quietly with Martin. That woman's special, Vance, worth protecting, but protecting her might cost you everything. Already figured that out, Caleb said. But thanks for the warning. They rode back to this property in silence, both lost in their own thoughts. The land looked different now, not just as Caleb's responsibility, but as theirs. Shared, joint. As they dismounted, Eliza turned to him. That was real, wasn't it? Not just legal protection. Yes, Caleb admitted. It was real. Good. She started toward the cabin, then paused. Thank you, Vance, for seeing me, for choosing me. Not many men would have.
Not many women would have said yes to a fool with worthless land. Maybe we're both fools then, she smiled slightly. But at least we're fools together. That night, they worked the land as usual. The willow trees needed checking. Some of the berry bushes had been disturbed by animals and needed resetting. Normal work, ordinary work. Except nothing felt ordinary anymore.
They'd planted seeds in the ground. They'd planted themselves in the community's awareness. And now they'd bound themselves to each other in a way that was legal, binding, and potentially dangerous. As darkness fell and they sat by the fire, Caleb found himself thinking about what came next. About Hale's response. About the land's promise. About whether any of it would matter if they didn't survive long enough to see harvest.
Stop thinking so loud, Eliza said without opening her eyes. She was lying on her bedroll near the fire, exhausted from the day. How do you know I'm thinking? I can hear your brain working from here. She opened one eye. We did the right thing today. You know that, don't you? I know we did the only thing we could do. Same thing. She closed her eye again.
Now get some sleep. Tomorrow we've got more planting to do. Those pumpkin seeds won't plant themselves. Caleb lay down on his bed. Their bed now. Legally, if not practically. Through the window, he could see stars emerging in the darkening sky. Somewhere out there, Hale was probably learning about the marriage. Probably planning his next move. But for tonight, they'd won. They'd taken control of their own story, their own future. They'd chosen each other, chosen the land, chosen to fight instead of surrender. And in the morning, they'd keep planting, because that's what hope looked like on the frontier. Not certainty, not safety. Just the stubborn, relentless act of putting seeds in the ground and trusting that something might grow. Even when the odds said it wouldn't, even when powerful men said it couldn't, especially then. Hale's response came faster than expected. 3 days after the wedding, Caleb was working the eastern terraces when he heard Eliza scream. Not a scream of fear, a scream of fury. He ran, his heart hammering, rifle forgotten back at the cabin. He found her in the Three Sisters section, standing amid destruction. Someone had trampled through the carefully marked guilds, yanking up stakes, destroying the string markers that had taken hours to position. Boot prints were everywhere, deliberate and deep. They came during the night, Eliza said, her voice shaking with rage. While we were sleeping, destroyed weeks of work. Caleb surveyed the damage. It was bad, but not catastrophic. The actual soil was untouched. They hadn't planted seeds yet. This was pure intimidation. We can fix this, he said. That's not the point. Eliza kicked at a broken stake. The point is they were here, on our land, while we slept. They could have done anything, burned the cabin, killed the livestock, killed us. She wasn't wrong. The violation went deeper than destroyed markers. We set watches, Caleb said. From now on, one of us stays awake at night. We take shifts. For how long? The rest of our lives? Eliza's hands were clenched into fists. This is what he wants, Vance. He wants us scared, exhausted, making mistakes. He's trying to break us without actually having to fight us. Then we don't break. Easy to say. Harder to do when you're running on no sleep and waiting for the next attack. She took a breath, visibly trying to calm herself. We need help. Real help. More than just Cyrus and Martin keeping their ears open. What kind of help? I don't know yet. But we can't do this alone. Not against someone with Hale's resources. She started picking up the broken stakes, salvaging what she could. Go to town. Talk to people. Find out what Hale's planning next. I'll stay here and fix this mess. Caleb didn't want to leave her alone. But she was right. They needed information more than they needed two people reshaping guilds. He rode to town, arriving just before noon. McGrath's saloon was already full, men drinking away the daylight, same as always. But the conversation died when Caleb walked in. Vance, McGrath said from behind the bar. His tone was carefully neutral. Heard you got married. Congratulations. Thanks. Also heard Hale's not too pleased about it. I imagine not. Caleb ordered a whiskey he couldn't afford. What else are people saying? McGrath poured the drink, slid it across.
That you're either the bravest man in Montana or the stupidest. Jury's still out on which. A man at the end of the bar laughed. My money's on stupid. No offense, Vance, but you just made an enemy of the most powerful man in the territory over a woman you won in a card game. She's my wife now, Caleb said quietly. Not a card game prize. Hale don't see it that way. He's been telling anyone who'll listen that you stole his property, that you're harboring someone legally bound to him. The man took a long drink. Says he's going to make an example of you. Show everyone what happens when you cross Victor Hale. Let him try. He will. This came from a different voice. Caleb turned to see Ruth Jenkins sitting at a corner table, a glass of whiskey in front of her. He's already started, been buying up debts all over town. Anyone who might be sympathetic to you, he's finding their weak spots, calling in loans, raising rents, making life difficult. Why tell me this? Because someone should. Ruth stood, walked over. You did something decent, Vance. Something most men wouldn't have the spine for, but decency doesn't protect you against men like Hale. Only leverage does. What kind of leverage? The kind that makes you more valuable alive than dead, more useful as an ally than an enemy. She finished her whiskey. Your land's producing, isn't it? I saw it myself, those terraces, those guilds. They're going to work. Maybe. Don't play modest. They're going to work because your wife knows what she's doing. Question is whether you're smart enough to use that knowledge as a weapon. Caleb frowned. I'm not following. Ruth leaned in closer. Hale owns land, lots of it, but most of it barely produces enough to justify the tax burden. He makes his money on volume, buying cheap, working it hard, selling high. But what if there was a better way? What if someone could make his land actually productive without him having to sell it? Understanding dawned slowly. You're saying we should work for him. I'm saying you should make him need you, not just want your land, but need what you can do. Turn yourself from a threat into an asset. Ruth headed for the door. Think about it. A man can't destroy what he depends on. After she left, Caleb sat with his whiskey, thinking. The idea had merit, but it also felt like surrender, like letting Hale win. She's not wrong, you know. Caleb looked up to find Cyrus Webb sliding onto the stool beside him. You were listening. Hard not to in a place this small. Cyrus ordered his own drink. Ruth's shrewd, always has been, and she's right about Hale. He respects power and money. You show him you can make money, suddenly you're worth more alive than dead. But we'd be working for him. You'd be working with him. There's a difference. Cyrus accepted his whiskey from McGrath. Look, I know it sticks in your throat. It sticks in mine too. But this is the frontier, Vance. We do what we have to do to survive. Pride's a luxury for people with full bellies and safe homes. Caleb rode back slowly, Ruth's words circling in his head like crows. When he reached the property, he found Eliza had restored the guild markers and was now planting the first corn seeds, working with fierce concentration. How was town? She asked without looking up. Informative. He dismounted, started helping her plant. Ruth Jenkins thinks we should work with Hale, make ourselves valuable to him. Eliza's hands stilled. Work with the man trying to destroy us. Work with the man who might leave us alone if we're useful to him. Same thing. She resumed planting, but her movements were angry. I won't work for Hale, Vance. I won't help a man who thinks people can be owned. Even if it keeps us alive. Even then. She jabbed a seed into the soil harder than necessary. There's a line. Survival's important, but not at the cost of becoming what we hate. They worked in tense silence. Caleb understood her position, even agreed with it emotionally. But practically, Ruth's advice made sense. They couldn't fight Hale indefinitely. Eventually, he'd wear them down through attrition or just buy the law to come take Eliza by force. As the sun began to set, Eliza finally spoke again. What if we don't work for him, but we prove him wrong? How? By succeeding. By making this land so productive, so successful, that everyone in the territory sees it, sees that there's another way. She looked at him. Hale's power comes from people believing they need him. But if we show them they don't, if we show them they can thrive without selling their souls to land barons, then his power starts to crack. That's a long game. We're already playing a long game. We plant seeds knowing we won't see results for months. This is the same, just bigger. Her eyes were bright with the same fierce determination he'd seen that first night in the saloon. We beat him by being better,
by building something that outlasts his threats. And if he doesn't let us live long enough to finish building, then we make sure we're too visible to kill quietly. She stood, wiping dirt from her hands. Come on, I've got an idea. Over the next week, Eliza wrote letters. Dozens of them, addressed to agricultural societies, university professors, anyone who might care about innovative farming techniques. She described what they were doing, the challenges they faced, the early results they were seeing. You're making us targets, Caleb said, watching her seal another envelope. We're already targets. Now we're targets people are watching. She added the letter to the growing stack. Hail can threaten us in the dark, but if there are scientists and professors paying attention, if there are people waiting for reports on our progress, then anything that happens to us becomes very visible. You think that'll stop him? I think it'll make him think twice. Men like Hale care about reputation, about how they're seen. She picked up another blank page. Plus, if even half these people respond, we'll have credibility, validation that what we're doing matters. The letters went out, and while they waited for responses, the land continued to change. By mid-May, the transformation was undeniable. The willow stakes had become actual trees, their roots holding terrace edges that would have eroded in spring rains. The ramps had multiplied, spreading across the shaded areas in thick, pungent carpets. And in the Three Sisters section, corn was sprouting. Not much yet, just green shoots barely visible above the soil, but it was growth where there should have been nothing. Visitors started coming. Not many, but enough to notice. Farmers curious about the terraces. Women asking about the ramps, which Eliza was happy to share. Each visitor saw the work, saw the results, and left talking about the crazy couple on the mountain who were making dead land bloom. Hale's response was predictable. The lawyer Harrison Finch arrived with new documents, this time claiming that Caleb's land purchase 4 years earlier had been improper, that water rights hadn't been properly transferred, that the property technically belonged to Hale's larger estate. This is garbage, Caleb said, reading the papers. I bought this land legally, have the deed to prove it. Deeds can be challenged, Finch said smoothly. He was a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses and the kind of smile that never reached his eyes. Especially when there are questions about water rights. The creek running through your property feeds into the river that crosses Mr. Hale's land. He has a legitimate claim to control that water source. The creek was here before either of us bought land. Nevertheless, the law is clear. Water rights in Montana are complex. Mr. Hale is simply protecting his interests. Finch set the papers on the table. You have 2 weeks to respond. After that, we'll proceed with legal action. After he left, Caleb and Eliza sat staring at the documents. Can he actually do this? Eliza asked. Don't know. Maybe. Caleb's head was pounding. Water law's messy. If he can prove the creek is essential to his land's productivity, he might be able to claim prior rights. But you were here first. Being here first doesn't always matter, not when the other person has money for lawyers. He stood, paced. We need our own lawyer, someone who knows water law. With what money? That was the question, wasn't it? They were surviving, barely. The land was producing hope, but not yet income. They had nothing to pay a lawyer with. I could sell ash, Caleb said, thinking of his horse. No, we need ash for work, for getting to town. Eliza chewed her lip, thinking, what about the ramps? We've got more than we need. Ruth said people would pay for fresh vegetables. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was something. They spent the next 2 days harvesting ramps carefully, taking only the mature plants and leaving the young ones to grow. Eliza bundled them in cloth, kept them moist. They took them to town along with some of the early lettuce that had started producing in the terrace catchments. Ruth had been right. People were hungry for fresh vegetables after a long winter. They sold everything in less than an hour, making enough money to buy seeds and have some left over. But not enough for a lawyer. We need more time, Eliza said as they rode home. Time for the Three Sisters to produce, for the berries to ripen. Once we have real crops, we can sell enough to fight Hale properly. We've got 2 weeks before the court date. Then we buy time. She was quiet for a moment. What if we gave Hale something he wants? Not the land, but something else. Like what? Information, techniques. I could teach his farm managers the same methods we're using, help make his land more productive. She held up a hand before Caleb could protest. Not for free. For an extension on the legal proceedings. Buy us 6 months to prove our case. You said you wouldn't work for him. I said I wouldn't work for him as his property. This is different. This is a trade, negotiated between equals. Her jaw set. I won't surrender, but I will negotiate. It took 3 days to arrange a meeting. Hale agreed to see them at his main house, a sprawling ranch structure that was bigger than any building Caleb had ever been inside, except maybe the train station in Helena. A servant showed them into a study lined with books Caleb doubted Hale had ever read. The man himself sat behind a massive desk, and he didn't stand when they entered. Mr. and Mrs. Vance, he said the last word like it tasted bad. To what do I owe this unexpected visit? We've come to negotiate, Eliza said before Caleb could speak. You want productive land. We know how to make land productive. We're proposing a trade. Hale leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. I'm listening. 6 months. You delay legal proceedings for 6 months, and I'll consult with your farm managers. Show them what we're doing, explain the techniques, help improve your yields. And if your techniques don't work, they work. You've heard the reports, seen the visitors coming to our property. The proof is already growing. Eliza's voice was steady. 6 months from now, your land will be producing better than it ever has, and ours will have proven we deserve to keep it. And if I just wait you out, let you starve, then take both your knowledge and your land, then you'll have neither. Eliza pulled out a folded letter. This is from Professor Whitmore at the Montana Agricultural College. He's interested in our methods? Very interested. If anything happens to us, he'll know, and he'll tell everyone who'll listen. It was a bluff. Professor Whitmore's letter had been polite but non-committal, but Hale didn't know that. The man studied them both with cold calculation. 1 month, he said finally. I'll give you 1 month to show results on my land. If I see genuine improvement, we'll discuss extending the agreement. 3 months, Eliza countered. Minimum. Some of these techniques take time. 2 months. Final offer. Eliza looked at Caleb. He gave a tiny nod. 2 months, she agreed. But the legal proceedings stopped completely during that time. No motions, no filings, nothing. Agreed. Hale scribbled something on a piece of paper, signed it. Mr. Finch will draw up the formal contract. You start tomorrow. As they left, Caleb felt sick. They'd just made a deal with the man trying to destroy them, but Eliza's face was set with determination. We just bought time, she said once they were out of earshot. Now we use it. The next morning, Eliza rode to Hale's largest farm. Caleb stayed behind to maintain their own land. Someone had to keep the work going. She returned that evening exhausted, covered in dirt, but with a strange light in her eyes. How bad was it? Caleb asked. Bad. They're doing everything wrong. Monoculture corn as far as you can see, soil depleted, erosion everywhere. She washed her hands in the basin. But that means there's nowhere to go but up. I can help them, really help them. Even though it helps Hale, it helps the land. That's what matters. She dried her hands. Besides, every farmer I teach, every manager I show these techniques to, that's someone who doesn't need Hale anymore. We're not just buying time, Vance. We're planting seeds of a different kind. Over the next weeks, Eliza split her time between their property and Hale's farms. She taught contour plowing to reduce erosion, showed them how to interplant crops to confuse pests, explained nitrogen fixing and companion planting, and a dozen other concepts that seemed like magic to men who'd only ever known straight rows and chemical fertilizers. And slowly, impossibly, Hale's farms started to change. Meanwhile, their own land continued its transformation. By early June, the Three Sisters section was thriving. Corn stalks reaching for the sky, bean vines climbing them, squash leaves spreading below. The berry bushes were flowering, promising fruit later in the summer. The terraces were working exactly as Eliza had predicted, catching and holding water that would have otherwise run off. Caleb managed everything while Eliza was gone, which meant he was working 16-hour days and falling into bed exhausted every night. But he could see the progress, could see that they were winning, slowly but surely. Then Ruth Jenkins showed up one afternoon, her face grim. We've got a problem, she said without preamble. What kind of problem? The kind where Hale's asking questions about Eliza's past, about Porter, about contracts. Ruth accepted the water Caleb offered. He's got someone digging, a private investigator from Helena, looking for anything he can use. We're married. That contract's void. Is it? You sure about that? Ruth's eyes were sharp.
Because if there's any legal loophole, any technicality Hale can exploit, he'll find it, and he'll use it.
Caleb's stomach went cold. They'd assumed marriage would solve the problem. But what if it hadn't? What if there was some clause in Porter's contract that survived beyond death, beyond marriage? When Eliza returned that evening, Caleb told her what Ruth had said. She went very still. "We need to see the original contract, the one Porter signed." "How? Porter's dead." "But his things aren't. They'd be with the county clerk, or maybe Hale already has them." She paced, thinking. If we knew exactly what the contract said, we could prepare, find our own loopholes. "Or we could run," Caleb said quietly. "Take what we can carry and disappear before Hale finds whatever he's looking for." Eliza stopped pacing. "You want to run?" "I want you safe. Running won't make me safe. It'll just make me running." She came to stand in front of him. "We've built something here, Vance, something real. The land's responding, people are learning, change is happening. If we run now, all of that dies. If we stay and Hale wins, we might die. Then we better make sure he doesn't win." She grabbed the jacket she'd just taken off. "Come on, we're going to find that contract. Now? It's almost dark, which makes it the perfect time to visit a county clerk's office." She was already heading for the door. "You coming or not?" They rode through the night, reaching town just after midnight. The clerk's office was locked, obviously, but Eliza had anticipated that. She produced a set of lockpicks that made Caleb stare. "Where did you—" "My father wasn't just a botanist. He was also poor. You learn skills." The lock clicked open. "Keep watch." Inside they searched by moonlight, careful not to light a lamp that might draw attention. The filing system was chaotic, papers stacked haphazardly, dust thick enough to write in. But Eliza was methodical. She went through everything related to Porter, pulling files, scanning contents by what little light came through the windows. "Here," she whispered finally, holding up a document. It was the contract. Caleb read it by moonlight, his dread growing with each line. The contract was worse than they'd thought. It didn't just bind Eliza to Porter, it bound her to his creditors in the event of his death. And there was a clause buried in legal language that specifically stated marriage wouldn't void the agreement unless the debt was paid in full. "How much was the debt?" Caleb asked. Eliza checked the papers. $500, the exact amount Hale had offered for the land. It wasn't coincidence. "He planned this," Eliza said, her voice hollow. "The land offer, the legal challenges, all of it. He bought Porter's debt specifically to own me. And when you refused to sell, he shifted to using the contract directly. Then we pay it. We come up with $500, and with what money, Vance?" She laughed bitterly. "We're barely surviving. We won't have $500 for years, if ever." They sat in the dark office, the weight of the situation crushing down on them. Hale had them cornered, had maybe always had them cornered, and they'd just been too stubborn or too foolish to see it. "There has to be a way," Caleb said. "There isn't. The law's clear. Until that debt is paid, I'm legally bound." She carefully returned the documents to their files. "We should have run when we had the chance. We still can. And live like fugitives forever? Never settling, always looking over our shoulders?" She shook her head. "That's not living, Vance. That's just slow dying." They left the office, relocked the door, rode home as dawn was breaking. The land looked beautiful in the early light, the terraces holding morning dew, the corn rustling in gentle wind, the berry bushes heavy with forming fruit. All of it might be Hale's soon. For the next week they worked like they were trying to outrun fate. Eliza continued teaching at Hale's farms, though it felt hollow now, knowing what was coming. Caleb maintained their property, though every plant he tended felt like something he'd lose. Then, 10 days before their 2-month agreement with Hale expired, everything changed. Caleb was checking the northern berry bushes when he heard horses, multiple riders, moving fast. He grabbed his rifle and ran toward the cabin. But these weren't Hale's men. It was Cyrus, Martin, Ruth, and a dozen other people from town. They carried tools, supplies, and something else, determination. "What's going on?" Caleb asked. Ruth climbed down from her wagon. "We're here to help." "Help with what?" "With whatever needs doing. Your land's proven itself, Vance. Now we're going to make sure you get to keep it." She started unloading supplies. "We've all put in what we can. Money, materials, labor. Between all of us, we've got enough to pay off Porter's debt. Caleb stared. We can't accept. You're not accepting charity. You're accepting an investment. Martin clapped him on the shoulder. Every person here has learned something from your wife about soil, about planting, about working with land instead of against it. You've made us better farmers. This is us paying that debt. But $500 is less than what we'll save on failed crops and wasted effort using the methods Eliza taught us, Cyrus said. Think of it as a down payment on future knowledge. Eliza emerged from the cabin, her face stunned. You did this? All of you? We did. Ruth handed her an envelope thick with bills. It's all here. $500 exactly, plus a little extra for the lawyer fees to make sure the debt transfer is legal and binding. For the first time since Caleb had known her, Eliza looked like she might cry. She accepted the envelope with shaking hands. I don't know what to say. Say you'll keep teaching us. Keep showing us there's a better way. Ruth smiled. That's payment enough. That afternoon, they rode to Hale's estate with the money and Judge Morrison, who'd agreed to witness the debt payment and legal transfer. Harrison Finch was there, sour-faced as Eliza counted out the bills. $500, she said clearly. Payment in full for Jack Porter's debt, as per the contract dated March 1887. Finch verified the amount, had Hale sign the transfer documents. The man's face was dark with fury, but the law was the law. The debt was paid. The contract was void. You've made a very powerful enemy, Mrs. Vance, Hale said as they left. I've also made a lot of friends, Eliza replied, and in the end, I think that counts for more. They rode home as the sun was setting, and for the first time in months, Caleb felt like he could actually breathe. They'd won. Against all odds, against a man with infinite resources, they'd actually won. The celebration that night was small, just Caleb, Eliza, and the knowledge that tomorrow the land would still be theirs. Thank you, Eliza said as they sat by the fire. For what? For seeing me in that saloon, for making a stupid gamble, for marrying me. She smiled. For being too stubborn to give up. Same to you. Caleb looked at her across the firelight. We did it. We actually did it. We did. She stood, stretched. Now comes the hard part. What's harder than fighting Victor Hale? Proving it wasn't luck. Proving we can sustain this. That what we've built can last. She looked out the window at the darkening land. We've won the battle, Vance, but the real work, building something that outlives us, that's just beginning. Caleb knew she was right. But tonight, he let himself feel the victory. Tomorrow, they'd worry about sustainability and longevity and all the other challenges that came with success. Tonight, they'd survived. And that was enough. But victory didn't mean peace came easy. 2 weeks after paying Porter's debt, Caleb woke to find Eliza vomiting behind the cabin. She was bent double in the early morning cold, her face pale as winter. How long? He asked, handing her water. Few days. She wiped her mouth. Just something I ate. But it kept happening. Every morning, like clockwork. And when Ruth Jenkins visited a week later, she took one look at Eliza and pulled her aside. How far along are you? Eliza's hands went still. I haven't said it out loud yet. Might want to. Man deserves to know he's going to be a father. That evening, Eliza found Caleb working the terraces. We need to talk. Something in her voice made him stop immediately. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. I'm pregnant. Caleb sat down hard, like his legs had quit working. His face went white. Sarah died. The baby died too. I know. You could die. I could die from a dozen things. Doesn't mean I stop living. She sat beside him. I'm terrified, but I'm also hopeful that maybe this time can be different. He looked at her, this woman who'd survived being property, who'd turned dead land alive. Okay, we're having a baby, which means we work faster, get more established before winter. The Three Sisters section was producing now, corn tall and strong, beans climbing enthusiastically, squash spreading like they owned the earth. The terraces held water perfectly. And in late July, the berry bushes finally fruited, only 5 pounds total, but they were perfect. Dark, sweet, impossible. First fruits, Eliza said, picking them reverently. The land's promise kept. They sold half in town for premium prices. With the other half, Eliza made jam that smelled like proof that this land could produce luxury, not just survival, but success brought Hale back. First came a small fire at the property edge. Then someone cut their irrigation lines. Then poisoned their well. "He's trying to break us," Caleb said one exhausted night. "Then he doesn't know us very well." But Caleb saw how hard it was on her, 4 months pregnant and hauling water from the creek. So he did something Hale couldn't counter. He built community. He rode to every farm Eliza had taught, asked not for help, but for witnesses. "You've all benefited from what she taught you. He destroys us. He's saying that knowledge is worth nothing." The response was immediate. Farmers organized night watches. Ruth coordinated food deliveries and help with heavy labor. With people watching, the sabotage stopped. Then Hale made his final move. Eminent domain, a fake railroad claim to legally steal the land. But Professor Whitmore had finally responded to Eliza's letters. He came with other professors and a journalist, spent 3 days documenting everything. The newspaper article that followed detailed their success and exposed Hale's suspicious railroad claim. Public outrage forced the territorial government to withdraw. Hale had lost again. 3 days later, Hale rode up alone. "I'm here to offer a truce," he said, dismounting. "I stop all actions against you. In return, Mrs. Vance continues consulting with my farms. Fair trade, properly compensated." "Why now?" Caleb asked. "Because I realized I can't win, destroy you, and the whole territory turns against me." He smiled tiredly. "Also, my 13-year-old daughter called me a bully to my face." They signed the agreement. For the first time since that night in McGrath's saloon, they felt something like peace. The harvest exceeded every projection. They made enough to buy livestock, expand the cabin, save for the baby. Eliza's consulting work brought steady income. By winter, they were ready. The baby came in late February during a snowstorm, just Caleb and Eliza, alone, facing the thing that had killed Sarah. Labor lasted 18 hours. 18 hours where Caleb thought he might lose everything. But at dawn, a baby's cry split the air. A girl. Tiny, furious, alive. "We did it," Eliza whispered, tears streaming. "What should we name her?" Caleb asked. He thought about Sarah, about graves and death and survival. "Hope. We name her Hope." Spring came. The second planting season brought neighbors to help, a community working together because Eliza had taught them cooperation beat competition. By summer, yields doubled. Berry bushes produced so much fruit they needed help harvesting. Eliza taught anyone who wanted to learn, paid or not. "You're giving away your advantage," Hale told her. "I'd rather have a territory full of successful farms than be the only one succeeding while everyone else suffers." "You actually believe that?" "I actually do." Years passed. Hope grew fierce and curious. They had a son, Thomas. The farm expanded in complexity, not size. Eliza kept experimenting, kept teaching. Hale died. His daughter Margaret inherited and immediately implemented Eliza's methods across all properties. The territory changed. More farms adopted guilds and terraces. The land started to recover, to breathe. On Hope's 18th birthday, she asked for the story of how they met. Caleb told it all, the card game, the mockery, the desperate gamble everyone called foolish, the hunger and threats, the community that saved them, the baby born in a snowstorm. "So you won Mom in a poker game," Hope said, "with a terrible hand, and everyone thought you were an idiot." "Pretty much everyone, yes." Hope looked at Eliza. "And you stayed even though you could have left." "I stayed because I chose to," Eliza said, "because sometimes the foolish choice and the right choice are the same thing." "I want to do that," Hope said. "Find land everyone's given up on and prove them wrong." That night, after Hope had gone to bed, Caleb and Eliza sat by the fire. "She's going to leave," Eliza said. "We're going to let her. We didn't build this to keep them trapped. We built it to show them what's possible." "Do you ever regret it, that card game?" Caleb thought about the hunger, the fear, the impossible odds, about Sarah's grave and the daughter who never lived, about all the pain and struggle. "No, not for a second. The hard parts made the good parts possible. Made us possible." They sat in comfortable silence. Outside, the land slept under stars, rich and alive. 40 acres that had been worthless. A woman who'd been property. a man who'd been called a fool. And somehow they'd built something that mattered, not just crops or success, but proof that another way existed, that cooperation beat competition, that seeing worth in what others dismissed could change everything. "Do you think we made a difference?" Eliza asked. "We made a choice. Every day we chose to keep trying, and our choice gave other people permission to choose differently too." He looked at her in the firelight. "You changed how they think about possibility. That's everything." She leaned against him as the fire burned low. Tomorrow there would be work. There was always work. But tonight they could rest. The fool and the worthless woman, who'd turned impossible into just difficult, and difficult into something extraordinary. The fire crackled. Wind moved through trees that shouldn't grow on this mountain, but did anyway. And in the morning, the land would wake green and alive, ready for another season. Because that was the thing about hope, about stubborn refusal to accept what everyone said was true. It didn't just change one farm or one life. It changed what was possible for everyone who came after. And that was worth every foolish gamble they'd ever made. Every single one.